This is the first lecture or discussion, let's call it discussion, in a series of 3 that are going to be focusing on first learning to write, and then we're going to change into writing for learning. Today I wanted to kind of focus on foundations of learning to write, meaning I want to look at briefly language acquisition and learning to read and write, specifically related to deaf, hard of hearing students, okay? So in addition to language acquisition, learning to read and write, we're going to talk, I think it's important to talk about the different functions, reasons why we write, and then a really big change in the ways writing has been taught and now is taught. Okay, there has been recently a big change in that approach. Let's start with acquisition. The most important thing about acquiring a language is to have meaningful interaction with a skilled, proficient user, signer or speaker of that language, like that. What's happening? What's happening here?
I see resistance.
Yes, good. Good word. Resistance. Resistance to copying or changing the language to fit what the mother wants. Right, it's a good way of describing it. Okay. Why? Because we know from research that the children really construct their own language, their own system, as they're acquiring language. And if someone like mother corrects them and they're not ready to incorporate a new structure, ignore it, like this child. So it's a kind of a lesson for parents. The child is actively working on language, but maybe correction won't help. And particularly if a parent tries to correct form or grammar. The child is concerned about what? Interested in what? Meaning. Yeah. So here's another.
Also, it kind of looks like the child is trying to incorporate, but not exactly like the parents.
Right.
It makes up their own rules. You know.
Right.
We need to copy.
Right. Let me just repeat that. The child is, well, finally, after 8 times, is willing to copy. But notice it gets it wrong, not what the mother intended. So even if there's a willingness, to go along with the parent, still it's not fitting exactly the child's system. So the child's not ready. Here's another example. What does this show? This example? What's the child doing?
Changing a noun to a verb.
Yeah. Child is kind of inventing a verb from a noun, doctor. Making a verb out of it. It's not English, but it's pretty cool. And it's creative. That's another characteristic of child language. Children play with their language and create parts that fit their system. Okay. There are other kind of common kinds of changes that children make that we have found in really all languages that have been studied. Let's look at some English and ASL examples. Let's start with meaning. One of the first words that an English-speaking child learns is daddy or mommy. Now, if a strange man comes into the house that looks a little bit like daddy, the child will apply the same word or sign often and label every man that looks like his daddy with the word daddy. Happens often. During the development of English, kids know soon that there's a way of showing past time with ed. Great, they go with it and they add it to every verb. And goad doesn't work for adult English, but doesn't matter. It works for their system. Interestingly, the same thing happens in sign languages. There's a way of making negation in sign, like want, don't want, right? Like, don't like. So we have found some children will be creative again and sign eat, don't eat. Is that ASL? No. Same, drink, don't drink. So they're playing with it. Also, often you see confusion of me, you, he, she. Probably less in, I'm guessing, in sign. But in English, you have a kid saying, want to sit my lap, meaning I want to sit in your lap now. Okay. Let's kind of hold this because we're going to talk more about errors, quote, errors later. For now, understand that for people who study language, errors are really important because they show where the child is in development. We're going to jump now to older learners, and just want to mention that for older second language learners, kind of abbreviate that L2 learners, there's often learning a language and learning to read and write in parallel. They happen at the same time. And that, for teachers, leads to interesting mix of skills. And we'll talk more about that later, but let me just give you kind of brief descriptions of 3 students in my writing class now. Janine, really a fluent writer. She writes pages, but, and a good reader. She often repeats herself, has some grammar problems, but a good fluent writer. Then I have Tara, who needs a lot of work with grammar, struggles with reading, and is just beginning to feel comfortable with writing. Toby, different again, reads a lot, good English grammar, but really is afraid to write, doesn't know how to start. These are all in one class. You know, we can't discuss now different backgrounds, exposure to different languages, but just understand that it's a complex situation with older students. Okay, are we good so far?
Yeah.
Okay. We really can't talk about writing and I'm asking you to be patient, we'll get to writing, without talking a little bit about reading. So let's consider reading, the processes involved related to reading. There are 5. I'm going to summarize 5. First one is print. A reader looks at print, tries to figure out, analyze how that's connected to sound. We're talking about hearing students now, who have grown up hearing a language. They have familiar sounds that are associated with meaning, right? So a reader's job is to connect the pieces to a meaning, to a concept. And that's called decoding print. Oop. Connected with that is figuring out the parts of words and how the words go together, and then do they connect with a meaning here in the long-term memory. Then there's this side. The left side of the circle is really related to knowledge the reader already has. So suppose you wake up, go to the window, look out and you see the street, it's wet. What do you assume? What are you thinking?
It's raining.
It's raining. Okay. We call that inferring knowledge. It's based on your experience, right? This is really experience with different kinds of reading. The ability of a reader to predict what will happen in a book or an article, and have a little bit of a sense of how those kinds of reading are constructed. Then finally, really experienced readers are able to kind of stand back and think about what they're reading. And also think about how they're reading. Am I facing a problem? Something missing? Do I need to stop? Do I need to continue? That kind of thinking. Okay. Let's talk about the first and second a little bit more. Question? Can I give an example of objectivizing? Sure. Is a reader able to figure out what's happening if a problem comes up? Like a real example, okay? Now, you're reading Moby Dick now, okay? Now, I want to apply that to real life experience. Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm talking less about literature and more about the process itself. Suppose you're reading Moby Dick and you read and find a new word you don't understand. What do? And you have choices and you think about, should I continue or should I stop and go to the dictionary? That's it, yeah, okay? Okay, let's consider the first two parts of the circle, okay, the decoding print and constructing meaning. It's really important that a reader be able to decode the print quickly. Why? Because the reader is adding parts and holds them in the short-term memory. When the parts are kind of together and then make a connection to meaning, then it moves to the long-term memory and stays there, we hope. So the reading process, putting together the blocks, has to happen smoothly and quickly. And also, it's best if the student, the reader, is familiar with a lot of words that can make connections. You figure out the word and then make the connection to the meaning that's here. If that happens quickly, the reading can proceed. If it doesn't happen quickly, some of these parts drop out and you have to start again trying to figure them out. So it can be a struggle if you can't make those connections quickly. So let's try an experiment. Okay, see how you do. I'm going to show you a list of words. There's pressure now. And I'd like you to say or sign the word quickly. Okay, we'll just go through it. Ready? Mm-hmm. You just have to say it or sign it, either one, or both. Okay, ready?
Nothing.
There's nothing there.
Aha, good, it worked. Okay.
Blue.
Blue.
Green.
Green.
Red.
Red. Purple.
Great. Here's another list of 4. Ready?
Red.
Purple.
Blue.
Blue. Green.
Green.
Okay. Another list.
Orange.
Grass.
Grass.
Blood.
Blood.
Grape.
Grape.
One last one.
Grape.
Grape.
Blood.
Blood. Grass. Orange.
Okay. Did you notice anything? Edgar?
The colors
Yeah.
change.
Okay. Good.
After the first.
Right. The second list
Second.
in each pair, the colors changed. Now, what about your reading of that list? Because I set up the color words that were associated with the color itself, the mind has already set up for that pattern. And then when you read the other list and you try and associate the word with the color. Yeah, I asked you to focus on the word. Okay. So you read the word, didn't matter what color. Okay.
It
What-
wasn't as fluent reading the word that conflicted with the color. So grape in brown didn't feel right. I mean, we read it, but it didn't feel right. There was a disconnect.
Okay. Did it take you longer to read the word when the color was in conflict? Or the word was in conflict with the color? Most of the time, the print in the text is always black, right? Okay. Okay. So you kind of agree that it took a little bit longer and it felt a little bit weird, okay? maybe also awkward. Okay, awkward. Okay, why is that? I'm a visual person, yes. Though the color means something, right. Well, it's a good point. I like this because it shows that we have color here, right? We have a sense of that. And when we read a word that represents color, it's connected to the meaning here, right? But when we play around with that and print it in a different color, it doesn't connect as fast. Right? You agree with me? There's not the smooth association of the print with the meaning, because I'm playing with the print to throw you off. Okay, this is just to demonstrate that when the print, and you all are, skilled readers, so you can figure out the print quickly. You've figured out the print, but you connect it with what's here. When there's a barrier, then it takes longer. And that relates to the time, and why timing, or the amount of time it takes you to decode and connect with meaning, is important. If it takes a long time, then it's going to be a struggle to connect it with the meaning and read fluently. I'm talking about sentences now. All right?
John,
Yeah.
so that didn't happen to me. What happened to me was that suddenly there were nouns, and before the colors were all adjectives.
Okay.
So I was trying to figure out why
I switched?
why you switched from adjective to noun. So I was not paying attention to the color.
Yeah. Well, that's...
Do I screw up your experiment?
Well, that's what happens when you do this with English teachers, I'm afraid. Because they notice a lot more about word class and things like that. No, I think if you agree that it felt... I know there's a big difference between the adjective and the noun, but that was just to increase the effect. That's why we did grapes in a different color. It was supposed to kind of increase the effect and the awkwardness. But if you...
Well, I still was stopped. I mean, it still took me longer because the connection was not as fast.
Yeah, okay,
Suddenly,
good.
something was interfering with meaning for me.
Good,
I
good.
was asking questions about, well, wait, why have the list
Changed into nouns.
from that form to this form.
Okay.
So it's still an interference.
Good.
So I guess if
You're just, I think, emphasizing that point, yeah, adding the English perspective. Okay. So this is, again, it's kind of related to decoding print and why it's important. And then, of course, we have to ask, how does it happen with deaf students who have, in various degrees, not been exposed to the sound of words? Well, we know that there is a connection between the ability to connect with sound and the ability to read. But we don't know which happens first with deaf readers. That ability may develop for some. It may start and help learning to read for others. It's not clear from the research yet. We know they're connected, that good deaf readers can associate with sound patterns. How? Don't know. And shift to writing now. Like with reading, writing has been taught we'll simplify it in two ways. Teaching the foundations, parts of words, to sentences, to paragraphs. That's kind of bottom up again. Or teachers have approached it as teaching strategies. So stepping back and saying, okay, what's a good way to approach this paragraph? What do you already know about it, about the topic? Any new words? And questioning about process. That's the top-down model. Also, more recently, different ways of looking at reading. One is problem solving. You will hear more about that approach later, I think maybe today. And then the third kind of major approach is a more social approach, that a writer doesn't sit at home alone and write, a few maybe, but not many. Often a writer shows writing to another person, has dialogue about writing, exchanges opinions about it, and talks about writing. So it's not only a lonely activity. Other words, it happens often through dialogue. And we'll talk more about that also, those three approaches. We have four here. Which kind of functions do you associate with school? Last one? Yeah. Okay. Do you connect the first three with school? Possible? Homework, maybe? Okay. Okay, the second is contact with the teacher through email. Okay, that's happening now, right? Personal? Maybe not as much, maybe not. Okay. Now this has changed. We did some research